Hello, everybody. I am covered in annoyance because I set up the whole live stream thing and then it just threw away all the settings like 1 minute before live. And then I didn't even realize that it happened, so I had to fix it at live. Um, so now we're handicapped in our propaganda, but nobody gives a shit about that anyway. So let's get started. Um, so I've been engaging, well, in a bunch of things, like a bunch of things have been becoming clear. And today, in my preparations, I was showing the book to someone, and in the early chapters, it was talking about heaven covering earth. And this cover framing was like, oh, that's amazing. Like covering is actually a really good way to think about it. Um, and I was struggling um, with trying to figure out something else because like in uh, in our group we've been really resistant to empathy, right? Which is basically going under the covers, right? And submerging yourself, right? Um, in the experience. And well, why is this a problem, right? Because you get absorbed, right? Like you you become part of the being that is manifesting under the covering, right? So I was like, okay, but all of these people who were talking about empathy, right? They're pointing at something that's important, right? Like they're pointing at compassion, like that's maybe the better way to think about it, where well, just like God was walking with Adam and Eve, right? Like you gotta walk with the person, right? But but God was walking, right? And Adam and Eve were with him in his presence. It wasn't the other way around. Like it wasn't that God was walking with, no, Adam and Eve like went in the wake of God. So I was praying and I was having a bunch of ideas around that, and then I thought, well, I'm gonna make a poem about it, but also like, well, what is this, right? Like can we have the place of God where we're walking and people walk with us, right? Because God is also providing the cover for the people walking with Him, right? And I think in the Bible that's described as wings, right? Like sheltering them under His wings. But this idea, yeah, is probably also going to be really applicable to Cain and Abel. But covering for me is the means of uh, well, keeping things high, right? Like in my church, we're always talking about lifting things up, right? That means that we're lifting them above something, but that also means that something extends from above that covers as well, right? And then honoring that process allows you to go back into what is being covered, right? And have a right relationship. So I'm trying to find a taste for that. Christopher?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm looking at similar stuff here. I wrote marked against time because Cain gets marked, and that kind of protects or covers, as you would say, maybe against the influences of time. And so, yeah, and he gets other things like building cities and whatnot to enhance that, covering or whatever, with questionable effect for him at least. But yeah, Castle.
Yeah, I like everything that you guys got, and I think we're all kind of coming pretty close to. We're kind of homing in on the same thing from different angles. One of the things that's been kind of on my mind pretty much since last week, actually, is this thing of kind of reconceptualizing what technology is. You know, so it's like technology is a gathering and a weaving in, or a sort of you say a collecting and integrating of something. And so with that very vague and broad definition, you can very easily fit things like fire and altars, as we talked about last week. But I have my title here as low tech, high fidelity. So, and low not necessarily as less. So you have things that are, when people talk about high tech, a lot of times they're kind of talking about things that are extremely complicated, that have a whole bunch of intermoving parts, these sorts of things. So in a way, that's almost, and then you look at the type of technology that's needed for higher things, like more spiritual things, and that would be considered more low tech. It's a little bit upside down. It's very simplified. Like an altar or a candle or something of that sort, or even in this vein of covering, something that came up on Thursday was the issue of incense. So there's a lot of covering. There's and it goes in multiple directions. So you have the incense is kind of going up as smoke, but also it's something that is, especially like in within a church context, like a lot of times the people themselves are kind of wafted with the incense, and that's sort of like a purification as well. So you have it going up, and then you also have it going down, and so it's kind of covering the entire space with smoke. So just kind of thinking about that a little bit, just with respect to what is technology, and how there's something that I'm not going to jump too far ahead, but near the end of today, we'll be talking a little bit about how there's a rectification that's needed when spiritual mediation is lost or compromised. So I'm just going to kind of leave that for now, but I think that's where we're heading.
Yeah, so I like this rectification thing. I I I would describe it differently, and I think we want to flesh that out because I think it's important to flesh out. But going to the high tech thing, it's lifting up the complexity, right? So and the complexity related to I want to say agency, but that's not completely true, right? Because a digging machine or something, right? Like these mechanical things that provide like a lot of agency aren't high tech, right? Like the high tech is it's like it's a spiritual expansion mediated through the technology or something. That's what the high tech is, right? Like the way that can conceive of myself through this thing, like a world opens up or something, like it's a portal or doorway. I think so in that sense, like the reason I'm talking about it like that is it's like an altar again, right? It's like so I want to like keep it bound in the spiritual domain. Yeah. So let's get going with the trio. Um, so to go back to what Castle was saying, um, there's an rectification, right? Uh, like I would call it an erection actually of something new, um, because the way I see it, there was an equilibrium with Adam and Eve, right? And they broke it. They broke the equilibrium. They had to fall. Um, so now a new equilibrium has to be established, right? Because the functionality of the communion of heaven and earth needs to manifest, right? So the next generation is that, right? Like the next generation. is the establishment of the new relationality, right? And then sin occurs in there as well. So just before we went online, I had this realization that um, Adam and Eve, they sinned by changing, right? So they embraced the change, right? And so they fell from from grace, right? They fell from walking with God. And what Cain is going to do to Abel is the opposite, right? Like it's the refusal to change, right? It's saying like, okay, like your offering is not pleasing God, and it's instead of changing the way that you're doing the offering and adhering to the authority, saying no, it's going to be my way, right? And in the my way, he's establishing a new type of sin, right? Like it's that like, and it's the inversion of the sin, right? So it's not the stepping out, but the refusal to step. And yeah, so like I don't like this idea of specialization. Like it's a response or something to the new reality after the fall. Uh, so and also like if like Cain and Abel, you can say well they're roles, right? Um, that are specializations because like what is a specialization? Well, the specialization is a job needs to be done, and you're gonna split up the job into a bunch of aspects, right? And then you only focus on the one aspect so that you can become proficient at that, and then you give the other half to the other person, and together you can make the whole thing. Um, but I think the better way, and I don't know why he's not following this. Is like no, Cain is having a purpose or performing a purpose, and Abel is performing a purpose, right? And together they are performing the purpose of bringing heaven and earth together. Um, so um, Abel was a herder of flocks, right? And it actually doesn't say that it's a flocks of animals, at least not in the way that he described it. And I thought like, oh, that's interesting, right? So what is a herder actually? Well, a herder is someone who's putting himself as the head, dictating uh, and cultivating life, right? Like things that have spirit, right? Below them, right? And then in that process, he's also refining, right? So he's I don't know, like he's choosing how to mate, right? Or he's choosing which wool to take or when to take the wool, right? Like um there's a way in which the will combining with be the flock feeding, the flock bringing up under his will is producing some refined product. While Cain is more dictatorial in the sense, right? You put the seed somewhere, right? And you, there's more of an expectation. It's not a relation. It's more mechanical in that sense, right? Um, so the thing, and we talked about it last week after the recording. I think the sin, maybe I'm getting ahead of it, but the sin of Cain was presenting unrefined produce on the altar, right? So he's taking something that's coming from the ground without it having the intermediary step that makes it worthy to be presented for God. So I think that's the big problem that Cain ran into. Um, And
I would add something to that. Well, I don't want to cut you off. I have
no,
something.
go ahead. Go
to
ahead.
add.
It's fine.
So, I would maybe push back on that his failure to present a proper sacrifice was a sin, at least in the moral sense that we might understand sin today. So, in like the Jordan Peterson sense of missing the mark, yes, but in terms of like an act of the will, of deliberately trying to like offend God or something like that, there's I don't want to jump too far ahead, but there is something that that God says to him, saying that that sin will be waiting for him if he does wrong. That he failed in this sense, but something that came up for me about a week and a half ago or so was this was the idea of malice. That malice is choosing a lesser good over a greater good, and that Cain is not. There's a discernment process that Abel goes through. So he has a good flock, and then he chooses the best one. It doesn't actually say that he kills it, but he at least selects um, the animal. Whether or not he also burnt it, I'm not sure. But it says for Cain at least that he just kind of takes something and then just offers it. There's not really much of a selection process that's in there. And so this thing of malice is if a person continues to go and choose a lesser good and not try to continually try to improve, then that starts to become, you start to make worse and worse decisions if you make a habit of that. And there was a I don't, this might be going a little bit off the deep end, but there's the story of like the rich young man goes to Jesus and says, what do I have to do? And then he leaves dejected because he was told that he needs to follow Jesus, and in order to do that, he should give away all of his possessions. And there's in the tradition, there were some saints who had visions of like the crucifixion, and they reported seeing the rich young man yelling insults and throwing rocks. And that whether or not that actually is true is like there's something to that, where it's just like, well, if a person continues to choose the lower thing every time, then eventually maybe you do become like that. And in the case of Cain, like it happens pretty rapidly. Like he chooses the lesser portion, and then he just kind of keeps he pretty quickly. I mean, I don't know how much time passes between him giving a bad sacrifice and not, but he at least chooses the wrong sacrifice, and then God gives him kind of a pep talk to try again, and he doesn't. So he chooses the lower thing, and then it's like the third thing we see him do is kill his brother.
Yeah. So I agree, right? So there's two paths of reasoning, right? And like I'm reasoning from the whole, right? Which would be communion with God, right? And so if you fall out of that communion, that would be sin. Now, that can be by accident, right? Or by ignorance or whatever, right? So you identifying with that sin, right? Or adopting it, that's that's I guess the sin against the Holy Spirit or something, right? Like, or in anyway, like there's a the adaptation puts you, like you said, on a path, right? Like it starts shaping your character, right? So now instead of only having the problem of not fitting in, you have the problem of that you're on a collision course, and like I like that, which just says like, well, at a certain point they can't coexist, right? And it's like, well, yeah, there you have your oppositional framing, right? And like that's the oppositional framing that I do agree with. Like at a certain point, coexistence is impossible because, yeah, you're not partaking in the same being, and then you can try and maintain the illusion that you're partaking in the same being, right? But like that is just like heaping on the flaws, or the disagreement. Um, yeah, so I guess we want to go to the text a little bit. Does anybody want to bring anything up? So I had this idea of specialization here, right? And yeah, like so I associated that with representations or also evolutions, right? So there's actually an evolution happening in man, right? Because they're facing a different reality or different generation, right? That's a language that is used there.
I think that well, as it says here in this, it says cooperation between the things, not, which might be a slightly different framing than saying they're specializing. They're
Hmm.
cooperating in different ways, which is what they ought to be doing.
Right. That's the grace part.
Hmm.
So I had a couple associations with the nomadic sedentary economy, right? So the nomadic is associated with movement versus fixation, right? Um, there's an establishment versus an introductory role. So the nomads are introducing the outside in into what is already established, right? So that would also be trade, right? Like trade is bringing the goods from the outside to partake in the inside, which can be a blessing or a curse, right? Depending on what is being taken and how that's received, right? So you have the sedentary is reliable, right? There's a predictability in the cycle, right? Um, the nomadic is unreliable, and in my mind I connected the sedentary with the year and the nomadic with the season. So because I've been trying to place seasons as yeah, like what is a season, right? Because like a season is a phase, right? Like while a year is a cycle, um, and phases reoccur in a different form, right? But they're still the same thing in a different manner. So essentially, and so you seasons also you get to retry your failure, right? So you have a good season and a bad season. Um,
I think I would probably just I would just add a little to that that I see what you're talking about and sort of I'm imagining kind of the sedentary farmer is surrounded by the farms, and then those things are subject to the seasons, whereas the nomadic herdsman himself is kind of on the wheel in a sense.
And he's kind of a season in himself when he visits.
right. So for example, right, like if you had the traveling merchant come into the village, right, you had a feast, and like that was a feast that was uh, occasioned, right? Um, so because it could only happen when the merchant was there, because it was about the goods entering the village, right? And everybody celebrating the yeah, Gustav, did you want to introduce yourself, or are you just want to go with the flow?
I'm Gustav's. No, I just yeah. I
Okay.
I think I should listen for a bit. There's one point I have, but I'll make it maybe before we go into the next section. But
Okay. So it's interesting, right? So now he's trying to relate Cain and Abel between the balance between time and space, right? So the thing that stood out to me is that that framing also defines the relationality between them. So that was really interesting because immediately it brought up the masculine and the feminine, right? What we're going to get into as well, right? So Abel is the masculine acting in a feminine role, right? So
Mhm.
and that's also in some sense how he sins, right? Being the masculine, acting out the masculine in the feminine position. Yeah, I want to go to the next page.
Okay, so wait, so before you go to the next page, I at that point, which is that it's interesting how this symbolism of like the what is the spear and the shepherd's crook, that it's really similar to the symbolism of many. Uh, I think it's like a European Christian thing, but it's definitely a thing of Riga, which is that a symbol of Riga is these two keys that are crossed, right?
Mhm.
Like two keys, and that shows up in a lot of European things, I think. And the symbolism of that is that there's two keys, and one of the keys is the key of Peter, of Saint Peter, the key of heaven, and the other one is the key of the gates of the city. So you have this secular and sacral, or heaven and earth symbolism being kind of shown in this unity, that the city is the unity of them both um, on some level. And I think it's interesting that actually that it's like it's two keys, so you can't really tell them apart in some sense. They kind of look the same, uh, which is maybe a bit confusing, but I think don't know. Probably it wasn't conscious when people came up with it, but um, finding out that that was the meaning of that symbol of the cross keys has been it's like amazing because I see it everywhere now, and I'm like, wow, that is like actually people giving a lot of respect to Saint Peter and to the priesthood and to the church, to the hierarchy. It's like, wow, we would not do that nowadays anymore. And in Soviet times, they replaced those cross keys with stars, with like the Soviet star. So they took the what do you call it, the symbol of the heraldry of the city, and they replaced that all the cross, right? Because actually the key of Saint Peter, the little fiddly thing on the end, right, that turns the key. It's a cross, like it's in the form of a little cross at the end. So they removed all of that and they replaced it with the Soviet star, right, which is
Well,
a different kind of symbol.
the star or the sickle and hammer?
I think in the case of
For
Riga, it was a star, but also maybe with a
okay,
sickle and hammer in other places.
Yeah, I
But
guess
yeah,
that's
that's also yeah.
I want to point out just to that point that there's also the negative contrast of kind of inverting that symbol where you've got like the skull and crossbones or the skull and cross swords, where it's just like, okay, well, how do you, what are the wages of subverting that, right? And it's just like you've got it, it's right in the background when you've got cross swords set against each other, as opposed to in this diagram, you have this nice integration of the combined effort, the complementarity.
so. I actually that's what I thought, right? Like the crossed sword. So when you cross blades with someone, that's not a union, right? Um, so well you could say well you're uniting in the duel or something, right? But I don't know, that's a bit lame. But um, yeah, I think that is really interesting, right? So if we go to the picture, it's like a staff, right, which is representing the upholding, right, of the covering. Um, so so that's a vertical alignment, right? And I actually think that like I don't know what that is. Is that a plow? What is the symbol? Um,
It might be like
anyway,
a bow or something.
yeah, or a spear even, right?
No.
But it is a tool at least, right? Like we can just and the tool is the focusing at one point, right? And that's a horizontal movement, right? Like the horizontal movement is having the multitude focus at at wanting to make something turn, right? So because you're manifesting a new not a covering but a revolution, right? Like because now you're inciting a new generation. Let's just say you're plowing a field for the first time, right? So now you created a reality where you have a field next to your house or something, right? So now the ordering of the houses is changed, right? And the meaning of life is changed as a consequence as well, right? So um, there's something you've inseminated your house, right? Like uh, you've you've impregnated your house with potential, right? And then it's up to you to labor to manifest that potential in a certain manner, right? And the manner by which that manifests is multivariable, right? Because you can sow different crops and all of that, right? Um, so yeah, so like I guess I wanted to point out this thing about the Levites, right? So it's interesting, right? Like this idea that the Levites didn't inherit any land, right? So there's a if we look at the relationship between Cain and Abel, right? And as being a shepherd is you who you are is directed by your flock, right? Because the flock calls upon you. And when you're a farmer, right, like you are directing the earth, right? So um, there's the relationship with the land and owning the land. I think is reflecting that, right? So you could even say that if you have a covering, right, like you have this priesthood and it needs to cover the land, then they need to move to the place that they're needed, right, to apply the cover. And so the the way that they relate to the land is in the function of covering as opposed to in the function of stewarding or something, right?
Yeah. I think that the relationship there is that the Abel or the priest, whatever, is they're symbolizing heaven and time, whereas Cain here, he's got like space and earth as far as what they're sort of connected to, and this, which is a little bit interesting to me. So
Yeah, I like the point of the heaven and time thing, because a lot of times you get kind of the reverse. Like that's kind of what we've been seeing most of the time through this past book. But then you get the element of like, the Israelites in the desert where the priests are splashing blood against the altar. And it's like there is an image of the priestly heaven and like a very overt image of time being placed there, whereas you've got the stonemasons and whatnot like kind of raising the stuff. They're generally in the sort of more like earthly or feminine aspect most of the time.
Yeah, so this is one of my disagreements with Peugeot. Like I don't want to identify blood with time like that. I like it's not like it's not connected, but like to make the one-on-one mapping, I don't like at all. Because like blood, right? Well, we'll get into it in two chapters, right? But the blood is the it is building the integrity of life, right? So you could say that um, in some sense, right, like the Levites covering Israel, yeah, they're covering that's they're being the blood, right? They're providing the oxygen, right? They're providing the life source, the sustenance, like for the whole nation. So is that time? Well, not really. They're mediating time or something, right? It's a little bit different.
I,
I think there's a difference between blood that's like circulating and blood properly and blood that's like flooding an area, probably.
Yeah. Yes.
So
Well, it's
I
blood that
think you
leaves
could,
the body, right? That's
yeah,
the issue.
you can imagine somebody bleeding out, they're running out of time. Or like there's that's one way of looking at it. But I do agree there is a manner in which the mediation of blood is not necessarily um, an image of time. Like if it's subordinate to a higher principle, then it's not necessarily just time.
Well, and bleeding, right? So I've actually been trying to figure this stuff out as well, right? Because with the menstruation and being like what is impure, right? And having to leave the camp. Well, what is all of that? Well, that's blood leaving the body, right? So like blood leaving the body is the blood no longer partaking in life, right? And so you can take that to the more spiritual level, like what is happening to a woman who's menstruating, right? She's under the spell of the menstruation, right? Like of and that frustrates her participation in communion because she's just possessed by or afflicted, that's the word, right? She's afflicted by what's occurring to her, right? And so if she wants to maintain communion, right, like extra measures need to be made in order for her to hold her place, right? And like you can do that through exile, or you can do that through better covering, literally, right? Like if you cover her better, then she can maintain participation. But if you don't account for that, then the integrity of the body itself gets corrupted, right? And so this blood or this leaking of blood is no longer located in the part of the body, but now affects like the whole of the body is leaking blood as a consequence of the local leaking.
Okay, so there's something that just came to mind. For as long as we're on the topic, I mean, might as well do it. But the that you had this point of like the difference between seasons and years. You know that you got the block and then you've got the phases and everything. And there is a friend of mine. He's like in his 80s or something like that, and he was an obstetrician for a very very long time. Delivered a whole bunch of babies and everything. And there was one particular woman he described that she had not undergone menstruation in something like a decade and a half because she just had babies every year, and like that was it. And then so it was like in a certain sense she was constantly building space, and there was no there were no phases anymore. It was a constant building that she had been doing for like a decade and a half. She had actually not experienced it since she was like 13 or something like that. And because she was very young when she started her family. But yeah, just a very interesting thing that he told me completely unsolicited when I talked to him a few months ago.
That's a cool story.
Well, and that's actually with the anti-conception stuff, right? It's like it's the same problem. Like if you cancel out that cycle, like you're erecting complete space, and like that's literally why people take it, right? They don't want to have the mood swings, right? It's like well, you can go into the whole masculinizing of the female population there as well. Um, yeah, like do we? Yeah, maybe we should. I don't know if I have something to say, but I think it's interesting, right? So they inherit the temple, right? Uh, which would be the altar, right? Or like the container of the altar. Which is also the thing that Abel has, or at least yeah, whatever governs, and and so like yeah, like what is this temple, right? Like this temple is the place of gathering, right, where things get lifted up. So that's also forming the pillar, right? The staff, like on a collective level. Okay, now I want to turn the page. Do we want to bring in some of the comments? Because there was a bunch of. So yeah, so this idea of tools, right? So I think tools have their own space. They have an option space, right? And then you can bring the optionality down by applying it to the earth, right? Like you can see it as a needle sewing, right? Like you make a hole, right? And now you bind, right? You bind what is on earth um, in the image, right? Which you bring down upon upon matter, right? And then you can. Well, I don't know. I think it's create, not build, right? So you create a reality, right? So like if you build a covering, right? Like clothing, like you just say the clothes of a king, right? Now there's a role of a king, the expression of the role of the king, which facilitates a whole bunch of new interactions and ways of being in the world, right? Like so being gets hosted, right? Or heaven gets hosted on earth through that. Um, okay, so I had a lot of things to say about this. So it's interesting that it's in the first sentence, Cain brought an offering from the gods and the fruits of the ground, which is like, I don't know, like that seems like a contradiction. Uh, so I don't like
It's
this.
interesting that he uses the word ground instead of earth, right? Instead of fruits of the earth, because you could interpret that as like seeds or grains, whatever,
Yeah,
fruit, apples.
right. Which is what is being meant, right? Like grains or seeds or whatever.
No, but the thing is, fruits of the ground, that could be like in French, it's like pomme de terre, which is potatoes, right? Or something.
But like in some sense, this is more correct, right? So if you say like the fruits of the ground is like a gold lump or something, right? So you've been digging in your mind and you come with this thing. It's not refined, right? So it can't participate yet, right? And so like only if you make a ring of it or a crown or whatever, it gets to partake. But before that, it's actually wordless still because but but when we assign words, right? Because well, that's the sin that we're in now, right? We're assigning value to unrefined things, um, because we don't let them partake in the higher meaning, um, and that's the sin of Abel. Like he's like, oh look, I'm honoring God by having a bunch of gold in Fort Knox, right? It's like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that's the point of the tools and whatnot or technology is to refine the thing so that it can, properly host the higher thing that you're refining it towards, or something like that.
Yeah. So let's go to the contradiction or the correct answer, right? So the correct answer is to use the fat, right? Which isn't like the fat isn't really the meat, right? Like it's like the store, the surplus of the beast, right? Um, like it's the treasure in some sense. And I think fat always also was used for lamps, right? and for soap, stuff like that. So fat also, because I don't know if it's here, but this idea that the scent of Abel's offering was the thing that pleased God, right? Or the
I think that was
aroma.
Noah's. Yeah, it was Noah's offering that was pleasing, I think.
No, Abel's also.
Well, his was also, but I think it explicitly says the aroma for Noah.
Well, maybe both,
Right.
but
Yeah.
but this idea that the aroma, right? So there's well, like if you heat fat, like that also is really aromatic, right? So this there's something where uh, well, it gets to go into the ineffable, right? Because that's what the aroma is, right? Like it's an atmospheric change, right? Which is associated with mood or something, right? And so the ability to change mood, and even if you eat fat or something, like your mood changes. So it's like, uh, yeah. So and then the firstborn, right? So this firstborn part is coming up a lot of times in the Bible, and I'm thinking of that, right? And so that means what it actually is talking about is it's the first generation, right, or the first manifestation of the generation, right? That's what it is, the firstborn. And so when you offer the first manifestation of the generation to God, then you know that the purpose of manifesting the generation was to serve God. Because like if it wasn't, like it doesn't make sense to offer the first to God, right?
Well, there is a saying in Latvian, pirmie kucēni jāslīcina, pirmie kaķēni jāslīcina. It means the first kittens need to be drowned. And it has to do with how your first action when you're doing something, like the first chair you build or the first, I don't know, yeah, something you make, piece of art you make, it's gonna be crap because it's the first one. So you kind of need to get rid of it. Like it's kind of you start with the second one actually, in a way,
Oh, that's
because the first one's
interesting.
just gonna accumulate all your errors, kind of.
Well, yeah, to say that in a different manner, right? It's not so much that it accumulates all the errors, but you don't have the standards yet,
Mm.
right? Because you don't know what's right. So it's like you don't even know how to judge it. So, yeah. Um, and
Like,
well,
yeah,
I think,
I do understand what you were saying about the intention and of the whole, of the whole flock, and the firstborn being, you by sacrificing that, you're really demonstrating that it was directed towards that. But you said that it doesn't make sense, and there is a way in which it does make sense. That's just what I'm pointing out, like in a way. But obviously, it's a huge
what,
sacrifice because they're the oldest and the
no,
most
like it
well,
doesn't make sense to offer the first fruits to God if you're not serving God. That's like,
yeah.
right? So it's
Okay.
actually pretty good proof that you did it with a proper heart, right? Um, and so you're testing yourself in a manner, right? You're making the sacrifice. Anyway, yeah. Like, do we want to take this? Um, so
So
the
when it says like with purposes, like between purpose, image, and identity, I guess.
yeah. So the identity is given by the purpose. Like like it follows from the purpose, and the image is following from the source, right? Like so if you have an origin, right? Like for example, your parents, like you're shaped in the image of your parents, right? Because they sourced you, right? Like they've granted you your being, so you're created in the image of them, right? but that's not necessarily your identity, right? Because your identity is following your placement in reality, right? Like, so, which is shape, not shaping. It's taking that image and fitting it somewhere, right? Making it adhere to a purpose, right? And then your identity gets established. And also, like, you can't do that alone. Like that, like the identity comes from outside, just like the image comes from outside, right? Like, and if you look at the modern sin, is that, we can be an image of ourselves, right? But then we get a narcissist, and we can establish our identity. Well, then we get individuals, right? That's the two problems there. Um, yes. So I didn't look this up, but does someone, anybody have anything to say about regarding? Like what is taking place there? Is that evaluating, or positively evaluating, or 'cause I actually don't know what that means, that word.
Well, I'm just kind of looking at the etymology of it. So the first definition of regard itself is a consideration or a judgment, or to look at or take heed. But then it also comes from guard, and so it's to keep watch or to have guardianship over or to keep.
So that has maybe something with integration, right? Because, like, if you guard something of the other or something, like, then, well, first of all, you see it as worthy of guarding, right? But it also means that you've adopted stewardship over it, right? So
Yeah, like if two people give you a gift and you only keep one.
yeah, I'll send you my regards. um, so then God said to Cain, "If you do it right, will it not be lifted?" So I was like, it's automatically lifts, right? So like, right participation means that it goes up by itself. Um,
It's also interesting how in the Hebrew the verb for lifted, I don't know if it's the verb in here, like if it's the specific word, but the verb for to go up is the same word as the word for God. It's El, actually.
mhm.
So this lifting up it can be maybe viewed as a kind of like deification, or what are
Sanctification, right?
the sanctification, or is it theosis, the thing that the Orthodox are
Hmm.
chasing, or something like that?
Yeah. That made godly, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
So, but yeah. So, but I like the passivity, and that's pointed out. And then what happened here is, uh, Cain spoke to Abel when they were in the field, right? Like, so I think field is important here because the field is a place that is not covered. Um, so it's also maybe also not watched by God in that sense. It's not under God. Um, then he rose up, right? So he's defined as having the inferior position, right? And he needed to overthrow uh, the authority of his brother. Um, And so he can't go up himself, right? So he needs to tear Abel down to his level, because that's ultimately what he's doing, right? Like he's not taking the position of Abel. Like he can't replace him. Like the only thing that he can do is remove it, right? So like the way that I look at this act is like a spiritual authority, right? So you have a spiritual authority that says to you effectively, well, you're doing it wrong, right? And then you're like, screw you, I'm gonna remove your authority from you, right? Like the life, the lifeblood that is in you, I I will make it equal to the earth. Like I will level it, and thereby I I will be my own authority. I will get autonomy. Um, so that's the pride, right? Like the unwillingness to obey.
I have something that I just found as I was kind of noodling around with respect to the sacrifice of the fat of the sheep. So this is an interesting thing because I've been kind of wrestling with this for a while of the fact that it doesn't explicitly say that he killed the sheep. It says that he offers the fat of it, or of them the fat, the ones that were fat, something like that. And I've been kind of wrestling with this for like a few months because I was like, well, Noah gets permission to eat meat. So like what exactly happens there? Because the Israelite priests are told that they have to eat the entire thing and not let it go bad for the morning. So what's going on there? So this is an interesting thing. So the word cheleb, spelled in English at least Cheleb, can refer to the choicest or best part of something, but it can also refer to actual animal fat. But in the case of sheep, there is fat-tailed sheep, and the tail itself, kind of like oxtail, is used as a culinary thing. So there is, and tail docking is a common, extremely common practice. When you think of sheep, you think of these sheep that have the tiny little like nubbin tails. I actually didn't realize that that is what a docked sheep looks like. A non-docked sheep looks like this. And so you actually not only can you remove its tail, but it's actually important that you do. Otherwise, flies lay eggs in the wool of their tail. But they also store fat, and apparently it's a delicacy. So you can actually circumcise, in a sense, the tail of the firstborn sheep. And I'm seeing a bunch of associations there between the firstborn and the circumcision and offering the fat and the priesthood and everything like that with the sheep, and how you don't necessarily have to kill it, while you can still cut something off and even burn it and have a very pleasing aroma.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Oh wow, okay. And that's even okay, yeah, but that connects to the circumcision, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
because and that's also a baptism or something, right? Because now you're pruning it towards a specific purpose, literally, right?
yeah.
Then you also have the thing of like we're the head, not the tail, right? Like the tail is the thing that follows, right? Um, so
It's
there's
also a snake-like thing. It's like a
right.
snake. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, so the thing that follows is the thing that is subject, right? Like so the tail itself has no will, right? So or you could say that in some sense the tail is connected to the animalistic will, right? So if you look at a dog, for example, right, like its emotion gets expressed through its tail, like its nature. Um, so yeah, that is fascinating. Um, so then since I had this alternative framing, right? It's like okay, so Cain rose up against his brother, right? So he's lower, and then if you accept that Cain is in the lower position, then this question, am I my brother's keeper, is like a really serious question. Like, is he supposed to keep his? Because like I would say that's a transgression of the hierarchy, right? If he's keeping his brother.
I'm almost kind of thinking of like the environment of like a church parish, and you've got all like the ladies that handle the stuff for the priest and everything. Like in many ways, like they're kind of his keeper, but also they're under his authority.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's in a different manner, right?
Yeah.
So that I actually that I'm connecting that with the tail, right? So it's
Mhm.
like there's all of these whimsical animal natures that's still in the priest, and
Yeah.
he's too busy with all this stuff, so that needs to be supervised by the
Yeah.
other people. Uh, but yeah, like I think that's a really interesting question whether he actually has that responsibility. Like,
I'm also thinking about this thing of like the regarding and keeping thing too. Like he no longer regards his brother. Like he's not.
hmm
He doesn't answer to he doesn't even say I'm not my brother's keeper. He says am I my like he's just it's so ambiguous. But also like he's now completely disregarding his brother because his brother's thing was regarded. So it's like he's kind of he's no longer I don't want to reduce it to playing the game, but like he's no longer participating. And also he has rejected, you know, the hierarchy wherever he is. Like he's rejected it from below, but also even if he were actually above his brother, he's also not accepting that.
yeah, there's a lot of things happening around that. That's something that will come back in a couple of years, right? It's like, oh, now I get it.
Well, also like the the state of not being your brother's keeper is I think it's really similar to a total separation of church and state, where the state has nothing to do with the church and
Mm,
like wants no relationship with it and just lets it, says, oh well, yeah, you're free to do whatever you want, but we're not gonna protect you in any way. And yeah.
yeah, that is a really good catch. Yeah, that because that's the same pattern.
There's actually oh goodness, what was his King Louis the Ninth that of France, like before France started going, light speed down the toilet. There's a good example of the king figure actually being his brother's keeper in a sense. He would altar serve at like 5 masses a day while king, and his advisors would come to him and say, "My king, like,
Mhm.
what are you doing?" And in his off time, he was out winning wars or whatever. But he was like, "No, I'm doing this because like this is what I want to be doing." He's like, "You guys are having meetings and stuff. Like that's not you're not doing any actual work. This is what I'm here to do." And but they'd always give him a hard time.
So there was a king of Mexico, and I think they got him from Switzerland or Austria or something. And basically, like the Spanish royalty uh, went there because he was like a nephew or whatever. It's like, no, you go be the king in Mexico. So like he brought like his whole what's retinue, and what he did is like he wrote out like this massive court structure, right? It's like I'm gonna go there, and I'm basically gonna establish the heavenly image in my court, and then I will subjugate the country, right? And so like he came there, like the local people, right? And they were like, "What the fuck, dude? Like, like what are you talking about? Like, can you rule the country or like fuck off?" Um, and so he had to fuck off. But yeah. Going to the last paragraph. So God saying, "What have you done?" Right? And I think this is like the same question he's asking Adam and Eve, right? It's like, what just happened? Like, like, um, So yeah, and so then the word, the voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Anyone want to take that one?
I think the word for crying is kind of similar to like calling out for someone. Like it's a referring to identity. So you call out to your mother, you to your father, you call out when you're looking for someone. Uh,
Yeah, so
it's like
the framing that I have in my mind is okay, so you have the blood, right? So that's the life-giving force of Abel. And then it's on the ground, which is potential, right, or matter, but it can't cohere into a body, right? Like the blood can't flow on the land. And so I think
well,
the
the way I see it is that Abel should be crying out to God, but he's doing it from the wrong place. He should be doing it from his own body instead of from the ground.
right, right. Well, yeah. Okay, keep going. Like what does that mean?
I don't think I mean, just in the basic sense, it means that he's below the feet of Cain, and
Mm-hmm.
it means that he's now subjugated to the purposes of Cain, which
Mm-hmm.
is the crops and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And um, it's like it's weird because it's still giving him life, right? Like uh he's still he's still giving a verb. He's still give like God is still giving an action to Abel. He's still giving him
Mm-hmm.
agency, even though he's dead and in the ground. There's still this kind of implicit aliveness to him,
Well,
and
but
I don't know what to do with
if
it.
if if your
Like
blood
it's
is not
yeah.
in you, right? Like if your blood isn't in you, that's what being dead is, right? Like the if you're not partaking in the life-giving force, right? But your life-giving force is spilled on the ground, then yeah, like you're dead, right? Like you're not fulfilling your purpose. Like
I find it really interesting. So you have it, like Cain is doing he's doing now a reverse mediation of sorts, so where he should have been kind of attending
Mhm.
higher. Like now he's taken everything that was not just the things that you would mediate higher, like the materials and the sheep tails and whatever else, or the grain offerings, or even ore offering, because eventually he does wind up getting materials and build cities and weapons and stuff. And like that, maybe he could have done that appropriately, but he has taken the things or the person that is actually doing that process and has completely mediated him all the way down and his entire potential to do that all the way down. And then to the previous point, like he's now subject to Cain. I mean, you see Cain's descendants wind up being like musicians and artists and like all the things that Cain is not, essentially all the things that you would probably expect Abel's offspring to be like. But also like something that and of course that also results in the flood, in a certain sense. But then you also have this thing. This is just kind of an offshoot thing, I mean, the ancient Israelites had the concept of the bosom of Abraham, which I've mentioned before. Was like that's kind of like the eschatological paradise before the kingdom of God was something that was being proclaimed. Was that you lie down with your fathers, bosom of Abraham? But before Abraham, like what did you have exactly? So like it's interesting to just kind of get that conceptualization of you even got like a pre-flood, like okay, Abel's still doing something, but like we've got no concept of him hanging out with Abraham because he hasn't been born yet.
Yeah, I'm not up to date on how Abraham fits in, but there, yeah, like, well, the fact that Abel is subject to Cain, right? Like, is what this allows him to have offspring, right? Like that, because any offspring that he has is offspring of Cain, because he's now in the image of Cain, right? Um, so yeah, like I I don't think I'm completely agreeing with this, but like I think the way to look at it is like Abel is like Moses and Aaron, right? Like he's the mediator between God and and Cain, and and so God is going through Abel, right? But when Abel falls away, he has to directly relate to Cain because like there's no other option, right? So I think that's more the way to see that, right? And so in other words, like and I think this is where like Matthieu doesn't go, and like I would have liked him to go because like the problem isn't that Cain and Abel are not in right relationship. Like the problem is that the mediation of Abel falls away, and the earth is relating directly to heaven without mediation.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the problem.
yeah. There's this pattern that I just spotted, which is that the blood of Abel makes the earth unfruitful. It's really similar to how in kind of Catholic doctrine, whatever tradition, if you take a relic of a saint and you touch it to something, it becomes like a third level relic or something, and basically it becomes holy, and you can no longer use it for mundane purposes. So it becomes sanctified and no longer able to be used. So what happens if you drive a, well, maybe not drive, but if you take some sanctified, I don't know, some saint's relic that was like his shirt or something, and you drag it all over a field, then you essentially you have a big problem on your hands. Like, what do you do with that?
And the only appropriate way of disposing of it is burning it.
Yeah, so like well, someone can do this for me. So do you guys want to look up the curses that were placed upon Adam? Because isn't the working of the field connected with blood as well?
It was connected to thorns, and that there's a blood connection there.
Right, because the way I see it, right? Like, so if Cain works the ground and his blood comes on the ground, right? That's proper, right? Because now his life force is feeding the earth, right, so that it can produce, right? But if Abel's life force is feeding the earth, well, that's like slavery, I guess. um, there, it's well, yeah, like that's the refining life force, right? The refining life force um, shouldn't work the earth, right? Like it should deal with the produce of the earth, right? If that makes sense.
Maybe there's this thing where yeah, because if Cain is like, if he's like bleeding and shedding his blood into the ground in the process of working the fields, that's like maybe why he's thinking that he doesn't have to refine the fruits of the ground afterwards. Like, I've already refined all this with my blood here, I don't need to do any of this other stuff, but that actually needs to be done to
Yeah,
offer it
well,
up.
yeah, but that actually fits on the modern framing, right? So if you see these
Mhm.
people, it's like, okay, we made this awesome AI or whatever, right? It's like, well, okay, but how does the AI fit in, right? Like, how does it get refined? And so like they're thinking that by shedding more blood, right, or having more effort, they can make the AI into something purposeful, right? And it's like, no, like the purpose needs to come from above, which is a process of refinement, and it requires a different mediation than the constructing of the AI itself.
I think that also, I think, kind of links back to a castle being, low tech, high fidelity. The AI is a very like high tech, complex thing, but unlike a shovel has like a very clear point for what it's for. The AI is like more ambiguous for the telos of it. So just circle back to the very beginning here. But
okay, just to keep going. So the opening of her mouth. So what? Okay, but that's basically retaining the sanctity of the blood, right? So it's basically saying like, no, we accept the blood as blood feeding me, right? That's what the opening of the mouth means, from your hand, right? Which is like, so now he's mediating. He's actually doing the opposite mediation, right? So he's doing the role that Abel is supposed to do towards heaven. He's doing it from Abel towards the ground. Um,
I'm seeing a little bit of this thing. You talked about covering a bit before, and this you have kind of the opening of the mouth as well. Like there's a covering, but then you also have Cain covering up. So it's like you've got the earth is covering Abel, but then also Cain is covering up what he did, but also kind of covering himself in a sense. But I want to point out, because you asked about the curse of Adam. That was a good point. There's a nice little parallel here. So you have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. And then you have this word, like you're going to be doing all of that, but when you work it, you're also not going to get strength. And then you're also going to be an exile and a wanderer on earth. But you still have to do all that other stuff, and it's going to hurt, and you're going to sweat, and then you get nothing for it.
Yeah, he's double cursed.
Yep.
So, to go into the strength thing, right? So when you work the ground, she will no longer give you strength. So this is interesting because you just said that she wouldn't do that. So I guess there already was a rectification by having Abel there as a mediator.
I think you could still get strength from it, but it would just hurt the entire time you were working it.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is strength? Like, how do we see that? Is that like an extension of agency? Or in other words, the earth is participating in your purpose?
I mean, the quality of produce might have just been really, really good back then. I don't know.
Well, but that's what the earth participating in your purpose is, right? Like if you get good food, you grow strong, right? So it allows you to better be you. It's like, okay, fair enough, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, and you shall be an exile and wanderer in the earth, right? So that's a domicide, like a breaking of a relationship, and so, well, we'll get into it, but effectively, what is established here is the land, right, which actually is a field, right, because he's been working it, right. So it's the land of his inheritance, right. Also, the land in which he had a relationship to God, right. So that's like literally the same as being exiled from the garden, right? Like he's exiled from the place where communion with God manifested into a place where communion with God is no longer possible, right? And like they'll go into like your face will be hidden from me or something, right? So um, the fact that he's now covered, well, that's okay. That's the way to answer that one. I was struggling with that all day, right? So he's self-covering, right? And with the self-covering, he can no longer reach God because well, we'll go into this, but this idea, right, like that, if you are in sin, right, like you can't see God's face because like you're seeing yourself, like you're seeing your sin, like you can't look through your sin towards God, like that pathway is blocked. And so like it's kind of like the establishment of the reality that then the curse can be spoken from God, right? Because like, um,
Yeah, and there's a really interesting parallel, I think, with the mouth, with the ground opening her mouth. So to me, well, that mouth can also be viewed as like a cave and so on. And I think I think this sort of means that Abel was received into the underworld or into Sheol in some sense. And it's interesting that like him being taken up in the mouth represents, I think, a that the ground respects his integrity in some way. Like it can't give him an identity anymore because now he's in a cave. He's like in a space. So it's like he is being his identity, his essence is being bounded to preserve it in some way.
like
So like
Jonah.
yes, yes, or like yeah, it's being preserved as a body but without the identity, right? And so that has to do with I think hell and so on, um and like a lot of these caves, especially in the Holy Land, there's like the famous gates of hell beneath Mount Carmel, for example, where it was I think Jesus and Peter talked. And then there's also the cave of the patriarchs, right, where the bones of the patriarchs are gathered together. Um, and I think there's some kind of mystery there about like why that's happening, right? Like why do we actually preserve the identity or like the structure of those that have gone? Like why do we do that?
To honor them. Yeah.
But also, I mean, like, planting. I think St. Paul might talk about this, something about like planting seeds in the winter. That it's just like you're sort of you're burying them in what's the I don't know the exact word that he uses. He uses something like shame or something like that, but he uses like kind of burying, because also when you're shameful, like you cover your face or whatever. So it's like you're covering them for a time that they might sprout later on.
Um, so I had a bunch of other comments on this last paragraph. So one of the things, right, like if blood falls, right, like it goes in streams, like so they're rivers, but also snakes, right? So like, and what's the ground, right? Like that's the place of the snake. Um, so there's something there, right, with the blood flowing on the ground and the re the reintroduction of the snake. And the other thing is, she will no longer give you strength, right? So man, I was genius when I read this, but I saw that as analogous to the breathing of the spirit, right? So like when God gives strength, right? Like he's breathing in the spirit into Adam, right? Like empowering him. And um, if the ground, right, like feeding you, right, like that's the opposite of that, right? Like that's the no, not the opposite, the other directionality, right? So there's a lifting up, and there's a descending, and so Strength is a lifting up. Oh, that's what strength is, right? A strength is a lifting up of the earth to participate in purpose, right? That's what strength is. Um,
There was an interesting thing I just heard today. It was completely insane, but also a really funny story. So there's this old story of a some saint that was a crusader, and that he was reportedly extremely strong in battle. And at one point, there's like, yeah, one of the Saracen cavalrymen charged him, and he cut the horse's head off with a single swing or something insane. And then the guy I don't know if it was the same guy, but one of the enemies asked him how he was so strong that he just chopped the head off of a running horse. And he asked if it was the strength of his sword, that there was something magical about his sword or something. So he picks up the enemy's sword and chops the head off a camel that was right there and says, "No, my strength comes from chastity." And I was like, that is such a wild exchange, but also there's an extreme example of that exact same thing of like, okay, he has raised his matter completely for a very specific and pure or singular purpose, and has just ridiculous strength to chop off the heads of horses and whatnot. Why not?
okay, so well, here's the raising matter, right? Yeah, so the inhospitable and even adversarial enables mediation, right? So there, yeah, and well, like we see that all the time, right? And then the inability to coexist, right? Well, we see that happening too, like we see it happening everywhere. Um, like I'm thinking of OnlyFans and stuff like that, right? It's like
I was thinking Kane is doing what you might call opponent processing in this story. So,
well, that would be the dialectic, right? But I think it's worse than opponent processing, right? Because like if you say, "Am I my brother's keeper?" right? Like you remove that bond, right? Like you remove. So it's just you end up with only opposition, right? You don't end up with the processing anymore. And I like so that's you start with opponent processing, right? In a sense when and then when you affirm the sin, right? So if you're not willing to rectify your false offering, then you end up in the opposition, right? And now you end up in this inability to coexist space, right? Because like now one side needs to win, like and either the winning is returning to God or or exile, right? Domicile, and we see who's winning, by the way. But yeah, so he's listing a bunch of well, maybe we should do the footnote first. Yeah, different skills. Right. Well, we've been talking about this, right? So he's saying consequences, but I think they're also sequences, like they're sequential in nature, right? So first you lose the guidance, right? So you remove the head, like we've been mentioning in the comments, the removal of the head. Um, then because you no longer have the head, the integrity of the body can't be sustained, right? Because now the body parts they stop cohering, right? Uh, they don't respond. What's the to the purpose? What's the word there? And then then because they no longer come together under a purpose or something, right? Um, you lose the integrity out of the body as such, right? Because now the relationships of the body parts are no longer ordered, right? So because the purpose isn't putting them into proper place, and then the body can't body anymore, literally, which actually I have experienced physically, which is interesting. um, yeah. So small comment here. It says flowing blood is a miniature representation of the flood. Um, so I'm just gonna go with saying this is flowing out of the body, right? And also I don't think I agree. Like I just like that's too reductionistic. Like when the body loses blood, right? That's not the body being flooded. Like that's the body being disintegrated, or it's preceding the disintegration, which is not the same as a flood, right? Like the flood is the ultimate consequence of complete disintegration, but but like the loss of the flowing of blood is not the same thing. It's it's something that can be reversed, right? Like you can bandage uh, the flow of blood, right? Like or you can break a weapon that is flowing the blood, right? Like there's things that you can do. Um, so also the other problem I had with this picture, maybe someone else wants to initiate it before I put my framing on it. Oh, I like that also. There's the seal is like an erection of the space, or well, no, it's not so much an erection, but it's the binding off of a space, right? Like it's like putting the stone in front of Lazarus' tomb, right? Like it's the completion of his life, right, or his funeral, or whatever, right? Like it's basically saying like um, that's the end, right? Like now we can go on. So yeah, I like. So there's different ways that blood can flow, I guess, in that sense, right? Like it can flow into a completion, or it can flow in a disintegration.
An image that comes to mind, thinking of this flood thing, because I'm pretty sure, and I don't have it in front of me now, but in the initial bit of the flood narrative that you have, that there's a torrential rain, but I think it also says that a bunch of springs break out of the ground as well. So like you do have the earth is kind of bleeding water, but it's not only like that's not where all the water is coming from. That's where like maybe a third of it or something like that is coming from.
So yeah, so the issue that I have is the story of Cain and Abel is written from the perspective of Cain, right? And it is about Cain. It's not about Abel. It's not about Abel's mediation, right? Like Abel is there as a functional, uh, well, shepherd, I guess. um, that gets removed, right? And thereby it's accentuating the change in the identity of Cain as a consequence of the falling of the head of Abel, right? And and like the blood is the means by which that happens, right? Like so like in that sense, the blood is a representation of time actually. Um, so yeah, I don't even know how to look at that picture.
Well, so something interesting with the thing of Abel going down into the earth and Earth kind of accepting him, and that now he's planted there. That now also Cain himself is giving his perspective and saying that you've exiled me from the day and the surface of the ground, not necessarily all of Earth or even the things under the earth, but that from the day and from the surface, and then I'll be hidden from your face, and I'll be a wanderer and an exile on the earth. So it's almost like he can be underground and wander at night or something like that. Um, and so I'm just kind of getting a little bit of that image there because you see, you've got Cain based on the previous page. You would think that it would be Abel, that's there under the ground, but actually Cain himself by mediating. Just kind of the insight I'm getting now is like by mediating Abel downwards, he actually lowers the entire hierarchy downwards. So there's a thing of like he's subject to Cain, and in a sense, he's subject now lower than Cain was, but Cain himself lowered himself and is still below Abel. And it's like he's lowered himself. Uh, and yeah, Abel is lower than he was, and now he's even lower than the surface of the ground.
Yeah, so I think you need to step out of the cave thing, right? So if you see the surface, right, as something that allows you to stand upon it, right? Because you stand upon the surface, right? So if you what was the you've exiled me from the surface, right? That means that he's sinking into
Right.
the earth, right? Like it doesn't hold him. The surface doesn't hold him. So what does that mean? Well, that means that he's lost dominion of the earth, right? Like the earth is no longer serving his purpose, right? Because in order uh, for the earth to serve his purpose, he had to be under Abel, right? So that like the purpose could be inherited from God, right? But like when you get into the self-referential nature, right? That he's now in, right? Because he's serving his own purpose, right? Then the disintegration eventually will make him unable to serve his own purpose, right? Because like his purpose is confused, and that means that the ground won't hold him, right? Like he can't walk on it anymore.
Wasn't there was something there was I don't know if it was a footnote or something like that that referenced the thing with dreams that we went over many chapters back about how the sensation of falling is like you no longer have the support of the earth, and that type of dream, that it's like
Oh man,
he's in that state in a waking version.
don't do this to me, man. I've had nightmares for like 2 years when I was like
Oh,
8. When I like actually like I had this sensation of falling into a paper, right? And then the paper wouldn't sustain my weight, so like it would fold over me, and then it would envelop me. Like it was not cool. I just
yeah.
no. Um. Yeah. So here's the question. Like, okay. So first he's exiled from the day. Okay. So we kind of need to go into the day part as well, I guess. Um. So the day is where the light shines, right? So that he's no longer receiving God's light, and as a consequence, he's no longer able to maintain the surface. Um. Right, and so wanderer and exile in the earth means that like he's seeking for purpose, right? But like he can't find it, right? Like so he's lost. Um, Oh yeah, well, no, I will be hidden from your face. So this is where I struggle, right? Like this sentence was hard, right? Because now he's talking about the perspective. Like it's not that God's face is hidden from him, right? It's that he is hidden from God's face. And I'm like I don't even know how to think about this. Like maybe that's just by being under the surface that you're hidden from God's face, because like, would that be the case?
I mean, there's other parts in the Bible where God says that he would hide his face from others, but again, like it's a very different wording. I mean, it could be that there's sort of like now there's a barrier between them, something like that. I'm also thinking when we had the chapter on the eyes, where there's kind of like there's the vision and then there's the extended vision, as though you're like looking into water, and then it's like the vision is sort of distorted because the thing is so low. I'm kind of maybe leaning in that direction.
Yeah, like because if you're not an extension of God's will, right? Like, are you intelligible to God, right? Like you now decoherent, right? So maybe that's it, right? The fact that you're not one, like you're not under an identity, so you're not visible in God's eyes or something.
And also, I mean, there's in a certain sense by being exiled from the day, he's hidden from the sun. So there is something as well that he's not receiving the light from the face of God or something like that. Like it could still very well be, that in God's omnipotence he could still perceive him no matter, even if he was 100 feet underground or something. But that he's no longer receiving the light being kind of shone on him. That he feels that he's been cast away, and of course he's immediately contradicted right after that.
It's also interesting how this is like a very desirable lifestyle of just, well, at least nowadays, of just living nightlife and staying up all night and sleeping in the day because you have the money to do so, and wandering the earth, like traveling all the time, not having a place to settle down. I guess also all that befalls me shall kill me. Like maybe you can also interpret that as being like, you're very delicate, kind of. Maybe you're a bit of a brat, and everyone you meet kind of, maybe you deserve to get stabbed. And that's also kind of viewed as a luxury.
I like the point of kind of like the wandering and the sort of, you think of like underground, like a lot of people describe like, oh, the underground club scene or something like that. You got dance clubs and bars. People go on bar crawls as well. Like they hop from one dance club to another because each one closes even later than the other one or whatever. And there's all kinds of illicit activities. And a lot of them are even literally connected, depending on the city you're in, connected to stairwells that go below another actual legitimate establishment. Like there's a lot of that sort of underground life and only being awake at night type of thing.
We had this on like spot where we could get a beer when we were underage, and it was literally this pub that had a, like, you go in the back behind the bathrooms, and there's like they've chopped this hole in the foundation, and so you're going through all the, like, the concrete and all the metal bits sticking out of it, and you kind of lower yourself through that, and there's this perfectly fine room underneath, and it had like a pool table, and it had like dirty couches and stuff, and then that's where you would go when you were 17. But that also has a lot of underground, and like through the foundation, and then, but like what's below the foundation, you get the messiness, you get flooding.
And there's the uncertainty too, because it's like you might go there a couple of times, and then the next time you go down there, the floor is lined with plastic or something. It's like there was one time when I went to Australia, there was I was in my mid-teens, and we had like this big group trip for a couple of weeks, and there's this like street kid that we were on the streets of, I think it was Brisbane, and he goes and he says, hey, you guys are from America, right? It was groups of groups of us students, and I think there was like 4 or 5 of us. And he says, "Hey, I want to show you like a really cool spot. It's my favorite place in the entire thing." And we actually went, which was the dumbest thing in the world because that could have been like human trafficking or whatever. Just immediate death was could have been waiting for us. And then he leads us down to a place that was actually a really high end music and clothing store. And there's all these famous people who had been there. You know, you got like Snoop Dogg, you know, and all these people that they took photos of them visiting, and they had all their merch and stuff like that. But there was no signage or anything. It was completely underground. Like that could have, it was either death or a clothing store. Like and that's also like the emergence is good type of thing, where it's just like, well, if you're okay with just checking out the random things, like every single action you do is a dice roll at that point.
Well, no, but it's worse, right? So because all that befalls me shall kill me, right? So it's like, why do you have emergence as good? Because you don't have judgment about goodness, right? So like, what happened to Cain? Well, he got disconnected from heaven, right? So he can't see goodness anymore, right? So if you can't see goodness anymore, right? Like the love of God is hellfire, right? So you can't you can't receive the goodness. Like the goodness will kill you, literally. Like there's no way that things can partake in life anymore because life comes from God.
The flood is good.
No, but the flood is good from the external perspective, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
No, but also from the emergence is good perspective, right? Because the flood is emerging.
Nah. Well,
Or do you think it's too scary to
Maybe if you're like
to
an
be good?
accelerationist.
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
like
definitely. Like if you're an accelerationist, then the flood is good.
like the
Well,
flood
if emergence is good, then you can't say that the flood is bad because it is emerging. So
Right.
even if you
right.
can't say it's good, you can't say it's bad either. So
Yeah, it's literally gushing out of the ground.
Well, you can say it's bad because you don't like it, but like that's not an ontological statement. That's just a preference statement, which is all the judgment that you have from that position, right? So that's the issue. So yeah, but like I don't yeah see Gustav, right? Like goodness, right, is gonna be self-referential, right? So I like what Mitchell said about the hidden principle, right? So like your identity is hidden, right? Like it's underground, it's not exposed, right? Like it can't participate in and also like it might not be fixed, which is even worse, right? But well, maybe we'll get into that later in the Bible, but um this idea that you're you don't know your identity, but what do you see, right? Like everybody's fixating their identity, like that's what they're doing, right? And like this is probably what the descendants of Cain do as well, right? Like they fix their identity trying to resolve the lack of identity, right? So that's where you get idol worship from, right?
that's probably also what the "I will be hidden from your face" is. It's like I won't be able to receive identity from you.
Oh, maybe that's because he can't speak to them. That's maybe what it means, right? Like if they, yeah, then the option for communication is not available from God to Cain. That's maybe the
And then you need technology to rectify that lack of spiritual mediation.
yeah. So oh yeah. So the the distinction that I want to point out, right, is that implicit in what Cain says here is he still recognizes God, right? So he hasn't rejected God yet, or at all, I guess.
It's kind of like the same thing with the relics of the saints thing, right? It's like if you rejected God, you wouldn't care that you generated a bunch of that you made a bunch of mundane things like holy, right? Because if you make a bunch of things holy by putting something that's holy next to them, that imputes that relationship, that holiness, um, those things don't serve you only if you also respect that holiness. But once you like disrespect it, you just don't care. You'll use it for whatever. The pan for making porridge, even though it's
Right.
holy.
And that's another thing too. And I think that people actually do fall into this thing where, they get things like blessed items and relics and stuff. And that there's the risk of thinking that it's magic or something, not that this is a technology for your participation, and that by your using it, the blessing is upon you, insofar as you are properly oriented and participating. It's not just going to be like it's a it's set aside or made sacred in a sense. Um, but it's kind of like I heard this thing recently about how incense is a prayer. Like just the fact of lighting an incense is a type of prayer, and that you're sending something up. Like it's an action as well as they use the contrast of when the early Christians were being persecuted, they would be told that they had to that all they had to do was take incense and then just wave it in front of some sort of Roman statue, and that was all they had to do, and just to prove their fealty to the Roman gods, even if that Roman god was like the wife of the emperor or whoever. And that they wouldn't do it, like they would rather die, and that their understanding was that they weren't going to pray, that the sacred item, which could be used for bad, um, was not going to be something that they were going to participate in. Like they didn't want to touch that with a 20-foot pole.
Mm. Yeah, but Paul goes into this, right, with the eating of the meat. Um, but yeah, like that is interesting because like I've been thinking about praying a lot. I think we all pray wrongly, and there's like it's nothing is more sad than a false prayer, right? Because if you have a false prayer, you're giving yourself the impression that you are praying, but you're not, right? Like you're doing something else. But the way I look at prayers, like I think everything is a prayer, right? Because every action that you have is basically a proposition that you set before God, right? Like I have this intention. How are you responding to my intention, right? And like, are you fulfilling my intention? Like, are you allowing the earth to bring forth the fruits with of my action, or are you saying that I'm in sin, right? Like, are you saying that like I'm not attuned to your will, and like I need to readjust my spirit, right? Like I'm not in the proper spirit. Um. So um. Yeah. How do I connect this back? Well, like so this idea of prayer, right? Like I think we have to conceive of the way that we're participating, right? And then like what did Jesus say, right? Like our Father God in heaven, like hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done, right? It's like okay, like we kind of have to have that part first, before we do our actions, because else like if we don't recognize the name of God, right? Like how can we do things in His name, right? Like how can He father us? How can these things happen? So going back to the text, it's like whoever kills Cain, right? So this is talking about others, right? And them doing something, right? So this is moving beyond what God did, right? Like it's the putting the agency in hands of man, right? And So from my perspective, like he basically says that no, don't, like, my will is the curse that I set upon it, right? And you don't get to further that curse, right? You don't get to partake in the killing of Cain. Like that is not right. Um, so yeah, so you don't get to move beyond God's will. Like I think that's what's said there. Um, and then this, yeah, I want to hear what you guys have to say about this letter thing.
Well, I'm thinking if I could maybe even lower it even more. Well, just kind of imagining like when you take notes on something, like you no longer have to do. Um, well, sorry, I may be jumping a little bit ahead to the next page, but um, just this thing of I really actually like his interpretation of the mark as something like written language because there is a certain benefit of I mean and you see this all the time especially with legislation like we talked about cooking justice or sort of refining justice and that there is a certain element of having standards that are at least understood and communicatable. Maybe you actually don't have maybe the spiritual mediation of an authority right there in front of you, but maybe you have a list of rules. Things like that can offer. I mean, if you completely reject the entire system, then okay, yeah, like you're just going. Or if you're illiterate, then yeah, it's not going to bother you. But there is a certain benefit of when you have people that are sort of on the same page. There's at least a baseline, um, I guess, influence you could say. I'm a little bit kind of loose on this one, but there's a baseline sort of influence that will at least provide some sort of spiritual buffer, whereas there wasn't like a spiritual mediation before that.
I think there's also a thing where, like, if you don't have the spiritual mediation or you reject that, the more like little fixed rules you have to set in place.
Yeah, I like that part. Like I want to hear good stuff on this because he's got the language aspect there.
Well, it's there's this idea or theory or something that actually in the first verse of Genesis the alphabet is mentioned as like the first thing that God created. Like from the Aleph to the Tau, right?
Hmm.
It says in the beginning God created at um Hashmaim at Haaretz, basically. And so sort of the idea that the spiritual alphabet has now been, I don't know, like instantiated in some sense, uh, and like concretized is a kind of it's like a gnosis or something, like it's a knowledge as propositions kind of thing. At least that's how I'm mapping it on right now.
Hmm.
Is that it was a bit more implicit, but now it's being kind of consolidated in a kind of self-awareness, I guess, about what you are. So your identity is becoming externalized, uh, and you refer to that externalization of who you are. And I think the whole self-awareness thing is also has to do with eating the apple from the garden, because they kind of the eyes were open to who they were themselves and all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, that's how I view it, and that has a lot to do with the relevance to today. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, like I'm having a completely different path. I don't like Matthieu's explanation at all. Like I connecting this to uh, writing law seems completely wrong. So what is a mark, right? So a mark is like a primitive symbol, right? Or a sign. Maybe it's a sign is better, right? So a mark represents something, right? But you also leave a mark on something, right? Which is like an impression or something, right? Like it's like a second order uh, thing. Like it's a footprint, right? That's what a mark is, right? And so when you set a mark on someone else, right? You assign someone an identity, right? Like you are marked for whatever, right? Like to be enslaved, or you're marked to be picked out to do this job, whatever, right? Like the marking is setting you out from others, but like this is God setting a mark on Cain, right? So that means that God is still on that Cain is still under God. Like he inherits the identity of that God assigned through him through the mark. So you could say that like the way that I see it is like a free radical, right? Like like he's disconnected from the source, right? But he's still maintaining like maybe like a spin or something, right? Or like a chirality, like you've been formed in the image of, right? Like for example, you leave your house, right? Like you're no longer under your parents, right? But they still have left their mark on you and your life, right? So they still echo on in the way that you're manifesting, even though you're no longer under their principality or something, right? Under their authority. So I kind of see it in that manner, right? And you can write that out, right? Like so you can say, well, my identity as a consequence of the mark is like I buy butter like this because like that's how we did it in our family. But it's like why, right? Like that's not the purpose of the mark. No, the mark is like a flattened image, right? Like you're not in the image. You're yeah you're marked by something, right? Like just like trauma leaves a mark upon you, right? Like you're not in the image of trauma, but like the trauma still dictates your life.
Well, look. For Enoch, no, for Cain, he kind of does the opposite thing with the city, which is that he builds a city and he names it after his son instead of after his father or after himself. And I think that's kind of similar is to how he's identifying with his own work, with his own manifestation, with his own generation.
Right, and so like I like this idea. What was it? Oh yeah, the coin is still spinning, right? So it's like okay, you have a mark, but do you know the meaning of the mark? No, you don't. Right? Like it hasn't concretized yet, right? Like or it hasn't revealed itself to you yet. Um, and yeah. So
I'm going to
yeah, so
first.
oh, well to go back to the being killed, right? So having some sense of identity, right? Like so for example, right? Like when we look at all of these non-binary gender non-conforming, right? like they're they are literally dead, right? They their spirit doesn't have a coherent principle to be informed by, right? But they still haven't fallen off the earth, right? Like they're still putting food in their mouth. They're still so they haven't completely disintegrated, right? And I think that's kind of what this is getting at, right? Like, okay, even if everything falls away, there's still something holding you together that prevents you from being killed completely.
I think part of this, it's like we're talking about supposedly like Cain and Abel here, but really the story is all about like the contrast between God and Cain. And so like the way God interacts with Cain is like the opposite of like how Cain dealt with Abel, with the mediation there. Like,
Mm.
Cain refuses to, you know, mediate properly with, Abel, whatever. And so then he gets all the punishment for that. But then God is like exemplifying proper mediation with Cain or to Cain.
So I have something that's kind of I mean, it's speculative, right? But so in the recent chapters that we've had, there's a lot of this talk of rectification and of kind of where things have gone flooded or gone awry, that you're kind of reestablishing the spatial axis, as Matthieu kind of calls it. And just some of the things that kind of come to mind are, I mean, you've got nowadays, like the sign of the cross is a well-known thing, but then you've got the Israelites when they were in Egypt, and there was the angel of death was going through killing all the firstborns, that they had to mark their doors, and the tradition actually says that that they marked it in the shape of a tau, which is a letter T. And then also you also get the image of the bronze snake on the pole. And it's like, well, how do you affix a bronze snake on a pole without having a crossbeam or something like that? I'm just kind of, I guess I'm just going to propose this as a pious belief that the mark of Cain might have actually been in the shape of a plus sign. I'm going to leave that there. I would love to find out, but I mean, I have no access to that, but I'm going to go with it.
Yeah,
well, that's kind of also the easiest mark you can make. Like that's a symbol, actually. Because like otherwise it's like a line, and that's not enough.
Yeah,
in some sense. And circles are hard to make, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like this idea that Christopher brought up with well, yeah, God is mediating with Cain directly, right? So what does that mean, right? So we can just transpose that. It's like, okay, so like how do you mediate for God with materialists? Well, dogma, right? Like that's the only way. Like you can't have like you can't communicate anything because like they have to participate in the being of God in order to get there, right? So there's the flattening into the letter or something, right? It's like the translation of the being in, well, you can make this jump into law ultimately, right? But the translating into of being into things that are recognizable, because I think that's what a sign is, right? Like we recognize a sign as something that affords us participation, right? And like the sign isn't equal to the being, right? Like so a stop sign does not convey us the the knowledge of the being of stopping, right, or something, but it allows us to participate in that being, right? Like there's a distance there that we still get to partake, and so if you have believers, right, to whom something hasn't been revealed yet, that doesn't mean that they don't get to partake, right? But they get to partake through this mediation, right? And because the mediation isn't through the the participation of the priest, right? The mediation has to go through through the word.
I would probably add something there as well, like that the usage of, I'm thinking of like signals here, in that you've got, actions have signals, but also you have the signals of something like signage. I mean, you take like the skull and crossbones, probably don't go in there, but if you have something that, in the case of, this where it's like, oh, well, you're trying to evangelize or what have you with some people that are very materialistic, that if there isn't spiritual mediation, which might have something to do also in terms of spiritually mediating downwards or across, might be something akin to signaling, I'm going to propose that you could, that a form of maybe peer-to-peer signaling or spiritual mediation could be something like exemplification. So like you see this a lot with people that, a lot of times, like there's been a big thing with, apologetics. So we're going to go out and we're going to talk about all kinds of things and stuff. But a lot of times the things that get people going to church is just seeing somebody like just living like a joyful life, despite the fact that they're dealing with struggles or what have you. And then they just kind of explain like, oh, this is why I'm so confident. And a lot of times like that sort of thing is, they're not explicitly putting it, but also it has been the case where you take people that are extremely far removed, like you can't see the person, and so you have to rely on their writings or something like that, like, oh, here's this guy that lived 800 years ago and it's like my only connection to his spiritual mediation is through his written words, because our ability to connect without some sort of concrete mediation, because I don't have someone describing him to me and telling me what he said in a way that you would say like, oh, this is what grandpa told me or whatever before you were born, that by having all of that kind of inaccessible, that this is kind of the next best thing while also being kind of comparatively insufficient, but it's what you got.
Um, yeah. So yeah, this idea of naming the city after your son, right? It's like, it I think that gets repeated, right, with David preparing the temple for some, like, it's kind of similar, the building of the temple. Like there's something there with the inheritance, and but yeah.
David planned to build the temple, but he wasn't allowed to do it because he was a man of war, and so Solomon built it.
Right, which is the same with Cain, right? Like he's also marked by his bloodshed. Then this word, the influences of death, right? So I that inspired me with the idea of disconnection, right? So like the death, um, it's like death is no longer having connection, and then time will manifest that, right, as dying. And so to be to gain life is to convert, right? So you return to the connection. Um, so yeah, so sleep is also a decoherence, right? So it's a decoherence of the head and the body, right? So the head is no longer supervising the body in sleep, but also in sleep there's a decoherence from reality as well, right? So the the head mediates your relationship to reality, and when that mediation isn't manifest, like you get spasms, dreams, right? All of these things where the adherence to truth is reduced, or and at certain point you can, well, if you're not grounded, right, like if you haven't built into your character your relationship with reality, right, you'll get delusion, right, you just ends up in fantasy world. Do we want to leave this, or do we want to try?
I have a feeling we could probably talk about this one for a chunk of time.
I can literally say that I only have one note on that page for my,
Huh.
like, but I just didn't like this framing. Like
Mm.
I I think it's misguided. But maybe that's the reason that we can talk about it for a long time.
Yeah.
But let's I'll give you a homework, Castle, and anybody who wants to challenge me, right? Like make a good case and try and convince me. Like
Of what specifically?
well, you said you kind of said you liked what Peugeot did here, right? So like I I'm skeptical about the connections that he's making, right? Like he's trying to put things one on one that I don't think belong one on one. Or that, like, yeah, that, like, this is not the best way to think about it or talk about it or something. And well, I'll just, yeah, like, this is my criticism. Like I feel like he's losing purpose in these chapters, right? So his purpose is to explain his system, and his purpose is no longer to adhere to God's will or whatever. Like, so that's why I say it's misguided.
I will definitely. I'm gonna dig into it without setting my mind to oppose you, but just to drill into this as if it were a mine and see what I find.
Yeah, like you just make the positive case, and I'll shut up, right? And then we'll see what happens.
And who knows? Maybe I'll wind up making a case for what you're leaning towards too. But I'll keep it open minded. I'll dig.
So, ARG, we'll go into the integration. So, what do we want to take with us into this time? So, like, I'm looking back at my intention, right? So there's a covering, and there's a head, right? And the head provides the covering by speaking or responding to the body, right? So the covering is something dynamic, intangible, non-determined in that sense, right? So maybe you want to make a connection to the other intentions, so like maybe you can. So
I mean,
yeah,
my not maybe not my intention, but the thing I have is the guardianship thing, which has to do with boundaries, which is also the covering actually. So I can also think about that.
yeah. So maybe that's the thing, right? So it's like, okay, the covering needs its own authority, right? Like it needs the priest to hold that up, right? And like the guardian is executing the will of the priest, right? So, but the priest dictates where the guardian is supposed to act. And so where are we like Cain, right? Like in that sense, where we're cutting off the head, um, um, and we're still trying to act out the function of the body without being connected to the head. Maybe that's a good intention there. Okay. Who has found treasure?
So something that came up for me, I was thinking a little bit about well, in this aspect of kind of cutting off the head and still trying to be the body thing, but also with respect to um, having well all of our different titles that we have here. Is I was thinking of this thing of rebellion or like rebelling against the law, and I was getting the image of kind of like a court building. So it's a well protected building. You know, ideally, like you're not if you have a court building, it's not going to be like a gazebo outdoors or something like that. It's usually a big stone building. A lot of times, especially if it's in a city district that has a lot of similar buildings, it might be a little bit difficult to identify because it's so well covered. Um, and you also have security guards and all these things. Like it's a very well protected building. You're going to have a lot of people who have rebelled and that they need to be processed within this environment. But also, there's a need for proper labeling. So, I mean, in order to even identify the building, and also a lot of times in these places, at least in present day, like more urban environments. It's difficult to find parking around these things. You have to kind of wander around to find an entrance and everything. So it's very necessary to have proper signage. And then also, once you get in, there's so many different manifestations of, courtroom and all these things. Like, I've gotten lost in government buildings so many times trying to like renew licenses and stuff like that. That I've completely walked the entire distance of a building because it wasn't properly labeled. Everything was so well covered. There's also, for security reasons, like there's really thick walls. Most of the time there's not windows because there's private information and documentation and all this stuff. So it's extremely necessary to have a lot of times not just proper signage, but also people that are around that you can actually ask to mediate for you, which I've done before. I've completely overshot the office I was going for, and then had to have somebody actually walk me around and show me like, oh, it's actually, you have to go through this door and then also down this little hallway and then into this. So just kind of a bureaucratic nightmare, but also this is where, if you have so much rebellion that's happening, that it becomes more and more necessary to rectify with yet more walls and yet more signage, and to the point where it becomes extremely cumbersome even for the people who haven't actually done anything wrong.
Also on that a bit, one of the things for a covering to be like very useful, you need a support for that covering. Thinking like, a tent needs, the tent covers you, but it needs the support in there. Otherwise, you don't have a usable space inside it. So,
and the tent pole is masculine. It's vertical and it's, solid.
Erect, yeah.
You could also think of this, I think it was in Greece. They had it's probably other countries, but they would have like the father's seat would be in like the center of the house. Like they would have like a certain like wealthy families, the father would have like a throne that was in the center of the house so that he could observe everything that was happening around him. So in many ways, he was the pillar of the household, right in the center.
So I thought about my sin against the head, and I have to think about the Transfiguration where Peter wants to build tents, right? So I don't want to cut off the head to have it below me. I want to cut off the head to keep it, right? And put it on a stick, right? So yeah, like there's I don't know what that means. And I don't know what that means for the participation with the head, right? But well, but like there's a revolutionary quality there, right? I think actually that's also in Peter's character now that I think about it, right? He wants to take the perspective of Jesus, right? And when he denies Jesus, is basically saying like, I don't know what the fuck you're doing anymore. Like, like what? Right? Like how do I still follow you? Uh, so I think there's something there, right? With wanting to have the vantage point. Oh yeah, that is always a mystery, right? Like even your own head is always a mystery. Like you don't know what you know and what you don't know, right? Like you get flashes, you get images of that which sometimes convince you that you do know, right? But you don't really do know that, and like having that eternal struggle to take that vantage point, right? Like on the one hand, like that's just completely horrible, right? Because like he got told, "Get behind me, Satan," and like, like no, not I'm gonna have to see if I need to tell that to myself sometimes, but also um, he got to be the rock, and he got to be the one that got handed the keys, right? Which like implies that it's necessary as well as completely annoying and hubristic. Um, so yeah, that's something to think about.
So, something with I mean, it really is so in the character of Saint Peter that you see like when he first gets called, he tells Jesus to depart from him because he's a man of unclean lips, and it's like no, he just told you that he wants you. He knows what he's asking for. Like this is not humility to say no, 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 don't pick me or what. It's like no, he just gave you an order, like don't try. But that's the thing is that he's also he's representing the everyman, like everyone they're afraid of losing control, but also like desiring to be in control. Like the thing with the transfiguration where it's like, oh, it's good that we're here. Let's build some tents. And then it actually says, but he didn't know what he was saying. Like it says it right in the text that he just didn't know. And so it's like there's a lot of those sort of moments where it's like, well, he's under the impression that yeah, he's supposed to be in charge. And then the get behind me Satan thing is like, stop cutting me off, like get in line, because it's not go away from me, Satan. It's get in line. You're out of line. Stop, cutting in front of me. Get in line. And so.
Well, but sometimes you run faster than your feet can carry you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you have to do that to yourself. Like you get ahead of yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a sin that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, you said the thing about like I want to like cut off the head to keep it, and if you're doing that, you are like by definition not wanting to participate with the body.
No, not necessarily. I don't think that follows.
Well, if you're keeping the head and not the body, I don't know what you're doing with the body. So.
Well,
if you're severing it, you're disrupting the participation there, I think.
Yeah, but it like it's the severing of the head is the obtaining of what the head has, right? So it has nothing to do with your relationship to the body, right? Like it's just like I guess it's a jealousy or envy towards the head and the eyes of the head, right? It's like I want to see what the head is seeing, right? So like I want to hold what the head is holding, but like if that's not my place, then right, like I'm in sin by aspiring something that's not mine, right? Like it's not laid out.
Well, I was also thinking in Peter's case, Jesus at the end he tells Peter repeatedly, feed my sheep, which is you're feeding the greater body with that. That's how you relate there somewhat. So
with the priestly thing, you take the Levites, and like they were cut off. They had no land. In a sense, they cut themselves off, or they themselves were cut off. They were the sort of circumcised tribe of the Israelites, of like that sort of microcosm there, and that their inheritance was God. So they received the head, but instead of cutting the head off, they had to cut themselves off.
Right, but again, right, like they can't be the body, right? Because then you get Cain, right? Like you have to have the head be above the body, but also you don't get to be the head ahead of yourself, right?
You can aspire to be the neck.
Well, no, but like it doesn't mean that you don't get to be the head, right? Like that's the problem. Like you get to be the head in God's time, like not in your time. That's the issue. Anyway, thanks for watching. I think this was amazing. We're gonna get fireworks next time. I don't know if I'm gonna be there next week, but I'm gonna make sure that I have plenty of firewood to roast Castle, and
we'll see.
I will and make sure that he's gonna be fully cooked I'm gonna have blood sports. I'm gonna ground him for the rest of his life.
Good
And
luck.
he will wonder. Okay.